This week, we welcome Eric Brown, Senior Security Analyst at LogRhythm, to talk about the outlook on phishing in 2020. In our second segment, we welcome back Mika Hoffman. He's a Principal Investigator at Spotlight InfoSec, and he's going to discuss open source intelligence in the cybers. In the security news, HackerOne breach lets outside hacker read customers' private bug reports. 2 malicious Python libraries are caught stealing SSH and GPG keys. Smash and grab car thieves use Bluetooth to target cars containing tech gadgets. And if you bought a smart TV on Black Friday, the FBI has a warning for you. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/securityweekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today. Qualys is introducing a new prescription for security, and it's free. Global IT asset discovery and inventory. Activated today at securityweekly.com/Qualys so you can achieve 100% near real-time visibility across your hybrid environments.
And welcome to the show. I'd like to introduce you to our host, a man who is not wearing an ugly Christmas sweater. Oh, wait, is he? Or is that just the chest hair? Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode 629, being recorded on December 5th, 2019, right here in G-Unit Studios. To my left, Mr. Larry Pesce is here with us.
It's been a couple weeks.
It's good to have you back.
Yeah, it's been, world tour, so to speak.
Yes.
Yeah, week in London, and I was supposed to have 36 hours home and didn't get that because I canceled my flight. So I had to wait until the next day, so I got, 12 to 18 hours home, something like that, to pack to go for 10 days at Disney and then Thanksgiving.
I was going to say, so your family just met you at the airport.
Pretty close, pretty close.
Basically.
Yeah, fortunately, I'd packed all my stuff the week prior, so I was basically take the suitcase and go, and then put the new stuff in, and then off you go.
Sweet.
All right, moving on.
Mr. Lee Neely is here with us remotely. If that makes any sense.
Good to be here.
He's got his Christmas
had
sweater
a
on.
Thanksgiving. I got my first ugly Christmas sweater on.
It's not even that ugly, though, Lee.
Well, I'll be building up over the month.
Oh, okay. To the pinnacle of ugliness.
Kind of like the Bruce Potter Santa hats.
That's right. The opposite of the pinnacle of ugliness, Mr. Joff Thayer is here with us. Joff, welcome.
I love you like a dude.
Wow, that's a lot of love, Joff.
Wow. I love you like a baby loves a diaper.
And I hear you two lovebirds, Lee and Joff, you spent some time together.
We did. We were at Pentest Hackfest up in the DC area just a couple of weeks ago, and it was so much fun. Aside from the first day when I had to puke my guts out because of food poisoning, but aside from that, it was a blast.
Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us with the best background you've had so far, although next week I know it's going to change. So
hopefully it doesn't change as much. Finally home for a little bit, so.
Yes.
And hopefully his internet connection doesn't suck either.
Oh, I hope not.
Hopefully
it stays.
We're going to have some chats.
That's right, with his ISP. Be like, so, about that fiber. Let's see. Join us at InfoSec World 2020, March 30th through April 1st. at the Disney Contemporary Resort. Security Weekly listeners save 15% off the InfoSec World main conference or World Pass. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2020 and click the register button to register with our discount code. Lots of great speakers, lots of fun will be there. I think Matt and I are hosting like a container security day or something like that too. So you should definitely check that out as well. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'd like to welcome our guest for this segment. Eric Brown is a disciplined professional with 20 years of service in the Air Force with a wide range of responsibilities and experience as a systems administrator, networking, and security. He's held a 10-year position as the Cybersecurity Information Systems Officer. That's a mouthful for a large unit. And today, he is a senior security analyst at LogRhythm. Eric, welcome.
Thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
So, Eric, you want to talk about phishing. I know we've talked a lot about phishing recently on the show, but you had some really interesting kind of angles to phishing. Also, with our collective crew here on Paul Security Weekly, we've really not kind of sat down and talked about phishing for some time. And I'm talking about email phishing, not like going on the boat fishing. So, yes.
It seems like it evolves a little bit all the time. So it's not uncommon to see something different.
Are there differences? I'll turn to our pen test folks. Are there differences that have happened recently, trends this year that you've seen in email phishing? From the pen tester side, anyhow. They're like, I'm going to share my trade craft. Screw you, Paul.
I mean, I think one of the things that we've noticed a bit, and Tyler, I know when we worked together, we were starting to see some of this as well, is that some of our better customers are actually starting to have users report the spam upstream, and that our domains start getting bad reputations. And not only do they get bad reputations, the registrars start sending nastygrams saying, "What the hell are you doing with these domains?"
Oh, interesting. That's new. I haven't seen that before.
Cease and desist has become a big thing for a lot of pen test companies and a lot of the domains we own.
Yep, and Tyler, some of the ones we're seeing is not just C&D because we registered names that may contain phrases that companies like to protect and those types of things, but actually the registrars coming and saying, "Hey, your domain has been reported for malicious activity. What are you guys doing? Why?
Wait, what happens if you ignore that?"
Nothing.
Okay.
Oh, I suppose it depends on
the registrar.
The registrar.
What if the registrar's in, like, I don't know, Turkey? Just saying.
Yeah, there's a pretty big trend right now. Phishing has gotten exponentially more difficult with those clients that are doing good security practice, and even the vendors that are doing a lot of the spam filtering, even the built-in stuff for Gmail and Outlook. Those are picking up a lot more of the generic stuff. Pretty much all your attachments are being scanned at least at a higher level, and then the payloads that you are sending in, you're having to spend a lot more time to phish. You're going to see a big trend, I believe, in abuse of platform. So a lot of platform abuse, phishing from other services, or abusing someone's service that they're offering in order to get malicious payloads in. And we've seen that with Skype and a lot of the other platforms that utilize that. But that's kind of the big thing because it's hard.
Right. Eric, from your side, working for a security vendor providing defense, what are some of the trends that you're seeing?
So there's actually 4 that I've seen a huge uptake on just within the last, probably 6 or 7 months. And that's what I affectionately just call it executive phish. But if you have a CEO in your title, I almost guarantee you're getting one of these. It really focuses on just social engineering, where it's a very generic type of email that might just say something simple like, "Hey, I'm busy in the middle of a meeting. Can you reply back really quick? I need some help." And of course, you're going to have people that are going to fall for it. They're going to see their CEO's name and they're going to panic. They're going to "Oh, he's asking for his help. I'm going to try and help him out," and not realize that the email is totally obscure. It's coming from a domain they should not recognize. And so I'm seeing a big uptake in that. But one of the other ones is I call it like a phish from a legit service. Not too indifferent that what was being talked about just a second ago, where stuff like Box.com or OneDrive, even Google Docs, and what they're doing is they're hosting a file there that might have a bad link or URL in it, and I don't know. I'm seeing a lot of these. And basically, what's sneaky about it is it looks like it's coming from a legit service. So the user's going to see, hey, so and so's sharing a file with you from box.com, for example, and when you analyze it or look at the headers and all the graphics that are in it, it's coming from a legit source, and it truly is Box. It's just the destination, that link, that file that's hosted there is what you got to be careful of.
Mm.
Yeah, that's typically the only way that we're able to get attachments in and of themselves are not getting in as much, especially malicious ones, unless they're very, very specially crafted. You're having to use platforms like Dropbox or OneDrive and giving those links out from something that looks legitimate and has the backstory and pretext to match that. So not only that, but with stuff like Office 365, you have to specially craft a lot of these links. Otherwise, they end up opening in the browser or opening in O365. And the execution and the way that the documents open and do things don't work the same as the desktop applications.
What are some other trends from your side, Eric?
Another one I'm seeing is HTML attachments. I mean, obviously, I think it's pretty easy to spot these. I send out emails all the time. I coordinate with people, and I don't remember the last time I've included an HTML as an attachment. So I feel like that should be a huge red flag. But what's tricky about those, obviously, you have to double-click it, and it immediately launches. So I'm seeing that a lot as well.
That's kind of weird that attackers – wouldn't you just strip – bless you.
Thank you.
Wouldn't you just strip HTML attachments? Like, is there really a legitimate purpose?
Exactly. I don't understand why they're in there to begin with. I mean, we might see something like certain services that might be informing you by HTML attachments, but I don't know. I still think it's a pretty unsafe practice. It's just something. It's just
don't go blocking HTML files yet. You're killing stuff.
No, that's true. I mean, even your email format is HTML.
Yeah, there's a lot of new attacks around encrypted HTA files inside of HTML. So the HTML then opens and renders and then executes the HTA, which can be encrypted and keyed based on something like the domain name. We've seen this in several different attacks, and there's open source tools that help you build these.
And the attachment, is this inside the message, Tyler, or inside the attachment, or both?
So the HTML file, so the HTA lives encrypted within inside of the HTML file. Mm-hmm. So the HTML file, which is typically a benign file and gets past most of the attachment or spam appliances or email client scanning, once that's in there and they click on it to see who attaches an HTML file, once that's rendered, then if it's keyed right, then obviously you're going to get some execution.
So if I were the defender, I would just strip all HTML attachments because that's separate from the message body, right? Is that a pretty safe thing to do? I guess.
No.
In production, I don't know how many big organizations are actually getting in HTML files. Honestly, I don't see a good reason, but there may be legitimate reasons for that.
I've got a few. I've seen some commercial applications that they include the work as an HTML attachment or otherwise encode information and put it in an HTML attachment. It's a COTS. You don't have a choice to have it encoded in the message. And when it's an outsourced business function, you've got to take the HTML file. That said, you don't have to take HTML files from everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You could identify the sources for legitimate business function. You could definitely cut the risk back a bit. Because as you say, you can do some really crazy stuff inside those files too.
Yeah, that's true.
And inspecting HTML files that's a rat hole. I prefer just strip them out entirely.
Yep.
And
I think one of our biggest offenders is fake Office 365 type links. We're seeing a lot of those where they're actually including the graphics. It attempts to look like it's something from Microsoft or Office 365, and the links in there. I don't know. I see them go all around the world. It's just all kinds of variations, but for the most part, they're just trying to fake some kind of method of looking like Office 365. They want you to log in, and they're getting a little sneakier. I've seen one where you attempt to log in, it tells you your password failed. You try it again, it tells you one more time it failed, And then what you don't realize at this point, it redirects you back to the original Office 365. So the next time you log in, it's successful. So I mean, I've seen all kinds of different variations, but a lot of these Office 365 fake sites in an attempt to steal your credentials, I imagine.
That's also how a lot of the two-factor authentication bypass methods are leveraging that. In fact, a lot of these are using things like Selenium or some other frameworks in order to just pass your two-factor token and then redirect you back and have you say it failed and then have you redo it and then it logs you in. But the first token was still valid, and once that gets passed off, that cookie is valid. And that's how a lot of these attacks are allowing the two-factor bypass. As long as it presents you with that page that looks very similar and the user types it in, there's nothing stopping them from passing the same token that you're putting in.
I mean, you could maybe make it more believable with some JavaScript that says your caps lock key is on.
That's pretty good. Nice job.
Because then they push the caps lock key, then it really is on. Yeah.
And then
I've even seen captchas. I've seen captchas you had to go through before you can get to your login.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anything to make it look legit.
Exactly.
Now, Eric, you say the use of the uploading to VirusTotal. What's that all about?
Well, I think this is a practice a lot of analysts do, and you got to be kind of careful. I mean, you realize you have sensitive information, you have stuff that's proprietary, you have a lot of details in the email that was intended to the recipient inside your environment. And, the bad guys are watching this too. If they're going to put out some kind of custom malware or something, they may have their hash for it already. And, if they have an account to it, and I'm sure they do, as soon as you upload that, they know, they're on to us. So there's lots of tools out there to kind of assist you, but I'm just, my concern for other analysts and folks who try to dig into these threats and these, in this case, phishing emails, that you also take some safe practices in how you analyze it.
So the attackers are monitoring VirusTotal in real time to see if someone's uploading their stuff, basically.
Well, if it's what I call a spear phish, if something's really a focused attack against your company, or they have some unique malware that they've created, and those sources that are available on the internet that are really popular, to include VirusTotal, they're watching for their own hash, so they know when you're onto them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not only that, there's been a lot of things that we've been looking at where customers' password list or very sensitive, say firewall logs or something like that ends up inside of VirusTotal, and it's being scanned automatically.
Mm-hmm.
Things like VirusTotal browser or the VT plugin, those are, after the last update, those are starting to automatically scan anything that's downloaded. And so if you're downloading an internal file and that hits your browser plugin, that then goes and pings VirusTotal or uploads that file to VirusTotal, sensitive customer information or sensitive environment information can end up in VirusTotal. And there's some good stuff that can be pulled from there. In fact, password breach stuff's been pulled out of there pretty recently.
Interesting. So also from your side, Eric, what are you seeing on the defender side? You talk about the value of incident response and playbooks and training. Is that still somewhat effective in preventing these attacks?
Oh, definitely. It's kind of like an ounce of prevention is worth a whole lot more cure. So it's like you have to have your team ready for incident response. You have to have all the key players in there. You have to have your stakeholders. You should have legal involved. You never know when something could turn into be something a lot huger than you're prepared to initially dig into. But the biggest thing is just preparation, and that's kind of where the playbooks come into play. You should have some tabletop scenarios and some examples where it's an eye opener to the rest of your team to make sure that they can understand what kind of threat you're looking at. Those different pieces actually really work together when it comes to watching out for potential threats, and then of course after effects. When you realize it is an incident response that you need to initiate.
Yeah, your IR teams too. They should be one of the things that they should be subscribing to is a lot of these Twitter feeds or Follow Friday or however you're going to do it. But following a lot of the InfoSec people that are doing the offensive stuff or doing some of the IR. Nick Carr's a great example. They're dumping new and novel IOCs almost daily on Twitter. And if you're if your inside guys aren't understanding the tactics, they're not going to have an understanding or even have the alerts set up in order to be able to find or see these kind of spearfishes and or the aftermath of the spearfish. Yep. Really, the spearfish getting in is that's usually the easy part. It's what happens after the execution and how do you see those next steps and make sure that you've got a good defense in depth set up to catch those next steps. Because once you get past that initial access and you laterally move, it's a pretty hard day to go hunting.
Is there a sharp contrast between how vulnerable I am to email phishing if I'm using on-premise or traditional-based email systems versus hosting in the cloud in O365 or with Google?
I don't know. I think we use Office 365 as well. And I go there a lot of times for intel. We actually look at the quarantine, and we were seeing a lot of stuff that is getting blocked that never reaches the user's inbox. So even from that perspective, there's valuable information. So I mean, as far as leveraging a cloud versus having something on-prem, I'm not sure. I think it just depends on how well it's being managed, maintained, keeping the quarantine up to par as far as catching that potential malware coming in. It's still going to be up to the user ultimately. There are still a lot of phishing that gets through, and it's just a matter of keeping that, like you mentioned earlier, the training, making sure that those folks understand what to look out for. And a lot of times the best way to do that is, having your own phishing scenarios that you can send out to users, and affectionately what I call the clickers. Find out where your other source of threat might be coming from.
Yeah. So I mean, go ahead, Tyler.
I think from the standpoint of on-prem versus the cloud, really, you kind of have to look at that past the phishing aspect of this, right? One of the big things that you gain from doing something like O365 or something federated.
Was that
what just fell over in his office?
I don't know what that was.
Was that a cat? That wasn't a cat. That was like an object that fell. That was
not a cat.
Okay, a living creature.
No.
Okay.
No, but leveraging something like O365 or one of the G Suites, really you get some additional protections there. If it's set up right, managed, and set up for like logging, you're getting some of the authentication things that single sign-on brings, and things like password sprays, or we're leveraging EWS in order to read email. Those things that you may not be protecting against, or your team may not be educated enough to set up properly. At those stages, that's when a cloud provider is doing a little bit better job. The 365 stuff is set up with single sign-on, and if you're not allowing legacy protocols, a lot of the EWS password sprays aren't going to work. If you have two-factor set up correctly, then you're mitigating a lot of those additional risks outside of the phishing aspect, on top of the additional support of having them look at all the spam and leveraging all of their clients and all of the filters that they're setting for a large data set of analytics that they're getting, and being able to do that. So unless you're using a large spam provider like Mimecast or Proofpoint or one of those.
Yeah, I was trying not to name vendor names, but the market research that I've been looking at and speaking with vendors is that basically there's two different methods to email phishing protection. One is the traditional email gateway protection, which is how we've done it for 20 some odd years, right? The other is I'm in a cloud hosting provider, and through the APIs of that cloud hosting provider, the newer companies are providing that level of email phishing and spear phishing protection. Largely, the data that I've seen shows that the solutions that can hook right into your cloud provider are doing a much, much better job of protection than your more traditional gateway-based email protection.
It gets a lot more complicated too with the gateway-based stuff, because you're going to have have your your mail relays and stuff outside.
It's messy.
Yep.
So I think the tip there, based on everything Tyler and both Eric have said, is it's your migration to moving your email into the cloud should be a thing in your environment to make you just more resilient to a wide variety of attack scenarios. Not that it makes you secure, but you're in a much better position. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. I think
when done right.
Office 365 well, like I said, I go there into the quarantine, and I see stuff all the time, and I almost use that as some of my threat intel.
Yeah.
I'm able to pull some data out of there and some metrics, and sometimes it's strong enough where I actually approach my network team and say, "Hey, we need to block this before we see it." So
Now,
yeah.
Also, with email phishing, I'm a huge proponent of a different style of training that Ira Winkler was telling me about last year, and since then I've been kind of looking at the way various organizations and various companies provide and do training, and some of the things that have stopped really bad spear phishing attacks from happening, and that is the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so,
and the process is, if you click on shit, you get caned.
no. The process, well, I'm glad you bring that up. I think it's a great point. The process is, rather than training the users to look for evidence or artifacts within an email that is indicative that it could be a phishing attack, train them to say, if someone emails you and they're asking to transfer money, stop, and you will follow this process, and that process will be extremely resilient to an attacker trying to steal money, and there will be validation steps for that. Obviously, that's a business decision. It speaks to your business processes. In my mind, when we're talking about targeted attacks and spear phishing, that has the best chance of reducing the likelihood of a severe attack.
And that process specifically for the funds transfer type of thing, which has become huge lately.
Yep.
But I think that process can also work for many other types of, if someone is asking you for credentials, if someone is asking you to verify information, do this.
Right.
Not
verify and then trust.
Yeah, exactly.
If someone from the outside is asking you for something and you're not expecting it, I mean, we can break these down into, I think, very simple rules, rather than trying to train the users to go, well, you got to look at the from field, and then you got to go through all the headers, and then when you hover your mouse over the link, obviously that's not working, right?
Nope.
No. In fact, something I was going to bring up, and it's right on the lines that you're talking about, is the at one time we used to train the person when you had to log into something, make sure it's secure. And we showed them how to do this. Make sure it's SSL, make sure you see the little padlock. That's not the case anymore. I would say 90% of the phishing emails that I've asked to investigate, they're all coming from SSL type connections. They're all coming from secure servers, whether they got compromised or it's some kind of back end. So that's just an example where that's failing.
Yeah, really the business process and the procedures, I hate to say it, like procedures in this case is the more effective mechanism or method for actually showing some results. Really all the people that have lost money and all the incidents that we've responded to in which a phish has caused a transfer in which a significant amount of money has been, taken, they now have a very, very rigid process around how those transfers happen. And it's step by step and everybody knows it. And subsequent phishing and even really, really good phishing where we have some insider knowledge and some additional info is not successful because that process is what stops the actual phish. It's not a technology and it's not a person.
And I want to get your guys' take on this, right? So we were talking about this in some webcasts because we've done a series of segments on phishing, but this is a great spot to bring this up. So when you look at the size of organizations, right, the smaller organizations are a little more resilient to spear phishing. Because if you're a small organization, take Security Weekly, for example, and Sam gets an email and someone's requesting something in the line of a financial transaction or whatever, right? She's going to walk into my office, right? We're a small business. We talk to each other all mostly in the same physical location. Matt is a text message away or whatever directly to the CEO, right? Then when you get to the really large organizations, they've had more time and more resources to develop those resilient processes, to put in all of those checks and balances, right? They maybe got some battle wounds along the way that forced them to implement those processes and more advanced technology. Quite frankly, when you're protecting tens of thousands of email boxes, you need way more advanced technology. You have teams of people doing security on the larger enterprise scale. It's those organizations in the middle where this is problematic, where they've got 500 to maybe 5,000 employees, some branch offices, maybe in different countries, and those are the ones that are most vulnerable to the spearfish where the attacker is trying to initiate a financial transaction. Do you agree with that assessment?
I think that's exactly right. And honestly, again, those are the hardest ones. Those are the ones that business process is going to have to become kind of second nature. But as attackers, like thinking from the attacker mindset, really, if you're spending enough time doing OSINT, you've worked out kind of what their process is.
Yeah.
You're really kind of figuring those loopholes out, and you're leveraging almost all good phishing attacks, especially spear phishing, you're leveraging a user's job function against them.
Right.
You're just getting them to do their job, maybe out of order, or maybe with an extra step, or
Right.
maybe just in a certain way.
In that size organization, Tyler, right, they may not have those developed processes because they've just hit a growth spurt in the company, right? Before, Sam walked into Paul's office, right? But now we're 500 people. What's the process for that, right? We've been in growth mode. We've grown from 50 employees to, hundreds, and now there is no process for that, and everyone's moving a mile a minute, and we go, oh, we needed to do this transfer, right? And that's where I feel like the companies in that kind of size and growth mode are really vulnerable to this.
And there's a lot of startup and tech companies that end up with a substantial amount of money and or purchasing, right? The procurement and purchasing for some of these, quick moving companies where you're 50, 100, maybe 150 people that you've spun up and no one knows anybody. But you're dealing with, 10 to 15 million of VC money. That's where it starts to get really interesting. And I think there's a pretty big attack surface there still. Yeah.
Agreed. Eric, you had a note to mention baseStriker. What is baseStriker?
Oh, baseStriker. So something I ran into earlier this year for the first time. I mean, I'm getting a chance to experience some of these different hacks is not the right word, but these phishing emails. And what I discovered was it made it a little difficult to analyze certain URLs, because when you copy it, you want to run it through a sandbox environment or something to see its destination. It wasn't working. And so I had to start doing more manual effort. And that's when I realized that the URL was actually broken into two pieces. It's not magic, anything unique. But after doing some research, I found a website out there. They too did some great information on it. They talked about Microsoft patching this vulnerability in Office 365, where baseStriker, the name used, would take the URL and break it into two parts. You'd have the domain separated from the end portion of the URL. And it would defeat sandboxing. It would defeat some certain tools. And apparently it was designed to defeat some of Office 365 security scanning. So it was actually pretty interesting. And now, even though we've got some feedback that Microsoft patched it, that doesn't mean they're not still using it.
There's a substantial amount of other research and or methods that are used for something very similar to that.
Yeah, in fact,
things
I think
like mod rewrite. Yeah.
Well, and Lee posted one too, kind of along those lines when I was reading the write-up, Lee, of that malware that you had sent the write-up for. It was using google.com/URL Q equals Q equals and then another URL, right? And when I tested that, Google said, "Oh, you're trying to go here. You sure you want to go here, right?" But if I'm in a hurry and someone needs this financial transaction or this document, I'm like, yeah, that's where I want to go, and I'm going to click it, right? Is that kind of similar to what you're talking about, is kind of chaining some of those domains together, or is that a separate technique entirely?
That's a similar way. That's a one that we've seen. There's also things that using things like ad networks, like a double-click ad network that has a referrer, right? You got the ad link that's going to be trusted because it's usually pushed through, or things where you're doing a 302 masked redirect, right? Like you're hitting a legitimate domain, that domain's loading something in an iframe, and then you're getting redirected. So those multiple staged attacks with phishing, whether it's a multiple URL rewrite or mod rewrite, you have to have a certain domain key or a certain coming from a certain IP address to get the payload. Otherwise it's a benign and it doesn't feed you anything. Things like that is the multi-stage is where pretty much all attacks have to be for anybody that's a mature client. And I think that's, even to get past some of the generic spam filters, is requiring a lot of these kind of advanced and staged attacks.
That's really interesting.
You're also getting into an area where you've got to have basically other perimeter protections. You're not stopping the phishing email or the link clicking. You're stopping the getting access to the malicious target itself, which can be a lot harder problem. But is becoming, once you've got to have some of that in place. Otherwise, you can't shut down the C2 because there's always a way around your defenses of some sort. On that note, though, I've seen as many as 1,000 updates a day to those kind of block lists. You need automation.
Yeah, and block lists just, I don't know. When I hear about those scenarios, I think more of like a virtual browsing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anyone's run into that on testing and things like that, where basically the user really doesn't have they have a browser, but something else is browsing on their behalf and just giving the results back.
I thought that had a lot of potential way back when I was kind of on the defensive side. I've seen things coming down the pipe that were like, Sandboxy is a great example. Like, I think they're still around, but where they're virtualized or they sandbox all the applications and with inside of an organization, no matter if you're running the application or you're downloading a file or you execute it, it's executed within the sandbox, and that either gets torn down or is in a separate environment.
We've seen a couple of different solutions. Business Security Weekly, we did an interview for those who are interested. But essentially, and we've seen different permutations of it, right? I think a lot of it's container-based technology, right? And when I fire up a browser, I can make a connection over a proprietary protocol. It spins up a container on my behalf. That container is my browser. Anything that happens is happening in that container. The nice part about containers, they're ephemeral, right?
Yep.
I can destroy it and move on to the next site or whatever it is. If it downloads a file, it goes off into another sandbox. I think that type of technology really has merit to solving this problem.
Paul, I think I remember seeing a video of you doing an interview at RSA of one of those really unique companies that were doing that, where they were actually just displaying images of whatever was being displayed with inside the virtualized Dockered browser. And that was actually a really novel idea.
Yep. Eric, you had a couple more notes on there. Being patched and being detectable. I'm not sure what that was.
I'm sorry, say again?
You had a note in there about hasn't been patched, or is it just now detectable? I don't know what that was in reference to. Excuse me.
I'm sorry, I can't follow. I can't remember what notes we shared.
That's okay. Let's talk about hunting phishing kits. Fish kits.
Hunting phishing kits. Here.
Moving right along.
Moving right along. So actually, no, I found that really interesting. I went out to this couple URLs. I got a chance to do some research on.
Yeah, these are the ones I sent you. This was a DerbyCon Stable Talk. Is that what that's?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, Stable Talk, and I can't remember the person's name now. I sent Eric all the research. I'm like, this is some cool stuff I saw on phishing. But basically, I think his a day job works for a vendor that I can't remember either. I'm like having a real hard time remembering things today. It's tough getting old, right? But basically, reverse engineering the phishing kits to see how they're constructed. So, Eric, I really want to hear what you thought of this particular research.
Oh, it was actually really fascinating. I think everyone, to some degree, in the security realm, you've always had that little wish in the back of your head that you could hack back, right? Mm-hmm. You start seeing these malware things come in, you start seeing phishing URLs, and you just would love to go back there and reach out and, I don't know, for lack of a better term, choke the individual. But getting away from that, this was actually a really good talk. It talked about being able to hunt down these source IPs, understanding where the traffic's coming from. And a lot of times these servers, obviously, they're compromised. They have poor security.
It was basically poor OPSEC on their part. So it was called Hunting Phish Kits. Josh Rickard was presented at DerbyCon 2019. It was Stable 23, and there was a video of his talk, and he did a great job.
He goes into reaching back into these compromised systems where the hack is originating from, or the payload's being stored at, and people don't realize it, but because it's so poorly protected, the defender can get in there.
Yeah.
And you grab the information and allows you to see some of the details inside the file.
Including like their source code and all, where like a directory traversal, you go one directory up and now you can see all of their source code for all of their PHP, whatever they're hosting. You can see all of their files of everyone they've fished and download all
Wait,
this
so you
stuff.
can't just see the source code for PHP?
I knew I was walking right into that, but there was no way of me explaining it without walking right into that trap.
Sorry, man.
I had to take one for the team there, okay?
You did. Oh. That, for those of you who are listening and are relatively new to the show,
No, we don't need to go into it.
I'm not, no, that is probably a 12-year-old joke. I'm going to leave it at that.
It is. Anyway.
I love you, man.
No, it was a great talk. I enjoyed that. I actually
Not my talk 12 years
a lot of
ago. We're
notes.
talking about Josh Rickard's talk from DerbyCon.
Exactly. Right. Being able to hunt backwards, be able to look at some of the details inside the payload, or maybe this HTML file that might be stored there. There's a lot of information you can get either from the attacker, or even if it might be like an IOC or something that you can work off of.
Yeah, and Josh was talking about basically at a framework of it's open source. It's all in the talk details that you can go automatically, like phishing emails are coming in, you automatically go try and download the Phish kit, automatically reverse engineer it, get all the information about it, and then funnel that back into your playbooks and your automation.
That's right.
That was a really cool kind of place that he took it, was really allowing the defender to take advantage of, something we've known for a long time about hunting Phish kits. That's certainly not new research, but where he took it in his open source project was pretty awesome.
I think those are valuable exercises that need to happen, just so the IR or the team with inside kind of knows how that looks, how fishes operate, how the frameworks look. With that said, though, really being careful that you're taking a much broader approach and taking the whitelist approach and really getting down the fundamentals of what you're blocking and not trying to go after each little individual IOCs, because you could chase a lot of these phishing frameworks or a lot of these exploit kits. You could chase them for years. There's so much, there was one that dropped recently on one of the dark sites that they left open. It had all the banking templates, had all of the JavaScript they were using. You could have written IOCs and dug through that for months and still only seen a small portion of what they were doing.
Right.
And that would be a very limited IOC to go hunt, right?
Yeah, or do all the research, and then there's, basically the attacker takes down their infrastructure, or the federal authorities take down their, and then your IOC is meaningless, and all that work's done. I did that for an exercise, right? It was what we were talking about before, an HTML email attachment, right? Decode the JavaScript, then see where it's pulling all the stuff from. You end up with a list of, 4 or 5 different domains or sites, researching each one of those and going through that whole thing. But like Tyler said, that could be just a tiny bit of their infrastructure, or it could be infrastructure that was, then burned, and basically you just went down a rat hole really for no reason, which is why automation, especially when it comes to this email phishing, is so important.
No, that's true. And it's almost like along the lines of a script kiddie. If that kind of program or code was made available, who knows where it came from. They go in there, make small changes, and then they claim it as their own. Next thing you know, you got all these attacks coming in. And again, your IOCs aren't going to do any good for those kind of attacks. And
the interesting thing about Phish kits, right, and you wish that attackers would pay attention more, right, because like the more advanced attackers create these Phish kits and sell them, but they put their own back doors. So you're out doing your phishing campaign, and every credential that you fish is then going back to the person that wrote the kit. Right? It's like you wouldn't look at the source code and see that. I mean, that's a pretty big. Anyway.
Oh yeah, actually, I saw an article on that where the scammers are getting the scammers.
Yeah.
So,
I mean that's been happening for years. It happens all the time. So. Anything else? Yeah. Go ahead, Lee.
So. We talked about a lot of stuff, and we mentioned earlier that we're, one of our at-risk segments is these small companies, particularly ones that are growing quickly. And as we're talking about all this stuff here, where should they put their quarter? Where should they focus on to get their arms around the problem? They're not going to be out getting Phish kits. I mean, and all the stuff we've got is awesome, but I'm thinking, what do we tell these guys to do? Where do we lead them?
Wow. So I don't know. I think the biggest piece, obviously, is the user. That's your Achilles tendon, if you will, your Achilles heel. The vulnerability there at the user isn't going to change. So that's probably the two biggest things that are always in the target of the attackers out there is the user and latest and greatest. I refer to it as latest and greatest, but what's hot right now, what's going on as far as applications, what's going on with media. Cell phones are really huge right now. I actually read an article where it talked about the cell phone industry is working around 355 billion a year, and then we're looking at over 6 billion devices out there by come the year of 2020. And it's such a huge platform. It's a gigantic landscape there that you're looking at in terms of being attacked. So I think for a lot of these companies, and even the ones that are coming up in the middle, it's just going to come down to really just good user training, and that'll actually take off a large chunk of the threat.
Well, that's a hard scenario, I think, to defend against is folks checking their email on their phones. Now you're greatly limited as to what they can look at. Like if you tried to look at an email header while you're at the airport ready to get on a flight, right? You're checking email and like, oh wait, I gotta go look at the headers and analyze this email on my phone, right? We might do that. We might develop tools or use tools to do that, but the 6 billion people that have phones, the large percentage of them aren't going to do that.
Of course not. No, that's not what I was alluding to. It's just that I think it's a huge attack vector, and it's definitely going to be taken advantage of. So I think user training, making sure they understand what to watch out for, is going to be a big piece of that. But no, ultimately, it's going to come down to MDM. It's going to come down to some new technology to help protect your phone, protect the applications where they're downloaded from. And I think we're going to need some help there. It's not just going to be the user; it's going to be applications and the cell phone use itself. But that's going to be a big piece of it to help reduce, I guess, that attack vector.
I think if you're talking about small to medium business too, and you're talking about how do you get people that don't have a regular security team or do not have a full-time IR team, like focus on the fundamentals, right? Take the control for the things that should be taken control of away from the user, so you're not worrying about the user. The user is going to be your last line of defense, and you do have to train them very well. But put in some policy and procedure that has a pretty rigorous setup, and then cover the things that are baseline. Things like a GPO that blocks macros, that doesn't allow trusted document locations. Things like protected view, always enabling protected view on all your Microsoft applications. Putting in things that require certain areas for those downloads to go that is not trusted or not protected. And then having your users trained around the things that they can control, right? Getting things that they do control where they're transferring money, or they get a document in. If you're stripping or reading all of these URLs or these documents and you're scanning them, you're covering probably 75% of them. Get that last 15%. You're not going to cover the top 10, but the last 15%, get those with some good controls, some additional protection, some blinky box or appliance that's trying to cover that additional piece. But really, the fundamentals is where it's at.
Eric, are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Sure.
He laughs like, yes, I've prepared for this my entire life.
Unfortunately, there is no preparation.
There is no preparation. Eric, Security Weekly 5 questions. 3 words to describe yourself.
3 words. So I would say
that's way more than 3
very
words.
Detailed. No, don't cut the first ones, please. Very detailed, humble, and thorough.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Wow, I actually was ready for these questions, and I came with one on my own, and then I went away from it.
You got my memory issues now, Eric. You've been hanging out with me too much
from
tonight.
a past discussion, someone said icicle, and I really liked that one. So
it's a good one.
Let's say baseball bat.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Military life is a really good start.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
Second.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Fictional or otherwise.
Hey, now.
John Wayne And gosh, what was in there? I had another icon I knew I would love to.
The mom is the
Let's
hard
go.
one.
Sorry. So let's go. Let's go. Just I would say John Wayne and Marilyn Monroe.
Excellent. Eric, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a great experience.
Well, with that, we'll take a short break. Come back with our next interview with Mika Hoffman. Stay tuned.